Hey guys, it's Bear. It is Monday, February 4th, 2019, and I wanted to do a follow up video to a video I did a couple months ago, which is entitled Yes, I'm a Gay Trans Man. So if you haven't watched that video, you don't really need it, but I keep coming across people who just can't wrap their brains around the fact that, yes, I transitioned from female to male. And yes, I'm attracted to males. So I wanted to do a second video because I've had to just sort of like really think about some things. I've had to explain this to people in different terms and stuff that I maybe didn't cover in the first video. So, one thing that I run across a lot is, well, first of all, let's backtrack. I'm very, very open about my trans status. I'm very open about my gay status, but not necessarily both like at the same time. And so I'm generally really accepted, like in the workplace and stuff, as being gay. And then somebody will find out that I'm trans, or I'll mention being trans, or whatever. They see it on my Facebook, or something like that, and they kind of like, huh? And whether it's that type of revelation or they come about realizing it a different way, a lot of people will approach me with this question of, okay, so you're into dudes, but you decided to become a dude, so now you're a gay dude. And it's like, no, that's not necessarily how it works. All right. So, again, just in short, gender identity and sexual orientation are two different things. They're not inherently linked. And it really does not work that way. I did not, quote unquote, decide to become a dude. I was always transgender. I was saying it at a very young age. Not that I was trans, because we didn't know what that was necessarily in the 80s, but I was saying things like, I'm a boy, I want to be a boy when I grow up. I really had a lot of issues with dressing up in effeminate clothing. Putting makeup on was just like torture. Having people play with my hair always bothered me, and so forth. So, and I was asking for like male clothing, male whatever, like from a very, very young age. So, when I actually came to understand what trans was, it was like, oh, well, that's obviously what I am. And then I did make a choice. I decided to transition to male. So one could argue that I never really was female. I was assigned female at birth. I presented female, but, as a very gender non-conforming female. And then at a certain point, I was like, okay, I'm going to transition to male. And honestly, my quality of life is much, much better now. So, yeah, it wasn't like I decided to become a dude because it was like, a fun little thing to kind of do. It doesn't work that way. Furthermore, my sexuality wasn't a huge factor in my decision to transition. Things that held me back were worrying about social issues, how my family was going to respond, and how that was going to maybe kind of hurt them or cause them stress. I think transitioning does put your family through a lot of stress and pain, and I was really worried about that. I was worried about the costs, getting surgery eventually, stuff like that. But actually, my sexuality wasn't like a big thing. I wasn't like, oh, if I become a man, like, what will my new label be? That didn't play into it. At that time, I thought that I was bi or polysexual or whatever because I had messed around with men and women, and I had actually had some experience with a trans woman, and so I was like, okay, like there's more than two genders, and I'm attracted to them, and I was intimate with both in the past. At the time, I was dating a guy, and so the only sort of conversation around sexuality was that this was going to make him into a bisexual guy. And honestly, he had more like soul searching and whatever to do around the fact that he was dating somebody who was going to transition into male, and that was going to affect his label of being a straight man. And to his credit, he did that. Unfortunately, that relationship didn't make it, but for a lot more reasons than just my transition. So I wasn't sitting there going like, okay, if I transition, I'm going to become, a gay male, because I wasn't only attracted to men at that time, which brings me to my next point, and that's the fact that your sexuality in general, for some people, is fluid. Some people are pretty fixed and they're that way for their whole lives. Some people, it's pretty fluid, and they, are straight for a long time, and then they discover that maybe they're bi-curious, and they'll shift around. There's like the Kinsey scale of, you might be mostly attracted to men, but you might have incidental sex with women or whatever. So it's not a fixed thing anyway. But there's a lot of instances that we've seen of trans people's sexuality shifting post-transition. And it's a really interesting thing. I actually did try to dig around and find some more like numbers on this, and I couldn't. I don't think the research is really done or out there yet on a formal level, but I have seen a lot of conversations around this, where people's sexuality shifted as they transitioned. The question is, did it shift because of hormone replacement therapy and chemical changes in the brain and the body, or did it shift because of social changes? I honestly lean a little bit more towards the social aspect. So, for instance, for me, I was really not as comfortable socially pre-transition as I am now, and I know that comes as a bit of a surprise for people because I'm like a huge extrovert, but that's with people that I'm very comfortable with. When I walk into like a martial arts class, for instance, I know everybody there, and I'm like, hey, it's Bear's here, and like, look at me. But I really previously did not want to go into spaces that I didn't know anybody. And I didn't want to go into spaces like clubs and parties and stuff like that. And part of that was because I really hated how I presented, and furthermore, I really hated how others would react to that. So pre-transition, I presented as female, but I also had a fairly large chest, and it was hard to present that chest. Right, so I did the typical thing where I'd wear like oversized clothing. I would wear like guys' shirts. You would very rarely find me in like a tight thing, but people would always ogle my chest when I would like walk into spaces. So I hated going into those spaces, and it particularly because what I didn't realize was I wanted to be treated like one of the guys in those spaces, So now here I am, comfortable with my body, and comfortable with how I present, and comfortable with how people treat me, and all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, you want to go out, totally, I'm there. I'm still not a big fan of crowds, but that's more of like a self-defense thing. I just get kind of agitated. Different story. So my sexuality shifted, and I slowly became less and less interested in women. I started to realize, like on OkCupid or dating sites and stuff, I labeled myself as bi or poly, and then I would filter myself to only see guys, and I was only responding to guys, and I just slowly but surely realized, like, I'm not attracted to women. I don't have any like doubts or regrets about having been intimate with women, but I look back at it and I'm like, yeah, I never was really that enthusiastic about it. I was curious, and I was experimenting. So, yeah, I became a guy. I didn't, decide that being a guy was going to be more fun or more easy. See my previous video for thoughts on that. But yeah, I became a guy, and now I'm a guy who's attracted to guys, and that makes me a gay guy. And again, looking back at that other video, no, it's not easier to date this way. It's actually very, very difficult. But I wanted to readdress some things that I didn't necessarily cover in that first video. So thank you for listening. Keep throwing questions my way. I do get a lot of people asking me for clarification on things or what have you, and I hope that this clarified some things that were maybe left unresolved in that previous video. Have a good one, guys.